During a great drought in the ancient kingdom of Chu, a lake began to dry up. What was once a fertile, life-filled habitat turned into a battlefield for survival. The fish, once swimming freely, became trapped in the last remaining puddles of water and mud. And then, in a desperate gesture, they began to smear themselves with mucus and saliva, trying to keep each other moist, trying to stay alive. Zhuangzi, the Chinese philosopher, saw something deeply symbolic in this image: the beauty of solidarity, but also the despair of forced help. Because in that scene, the fish weren't free to choose. They were helping each other, yes, but not out of spontaneous generosity. It was that, or death. And as moving as it was, there was a sadness in the air. The care came from fear, from scarcity, from a lack of options. Zhuangzi then asks, what if the lake were full? What if the fish had an abundance of water, space to swim, freedom to roam? Help would still exist, but now it would be light, voluntary, free from the urgency of despair. In his hands, this simple image becomes a profound teaching. The real beauty of connection lies in choice, not obligation. And maybe that's the starting point to talk about happiness, especially the happiness of not needing another person. Because when the soul is dry, even the smallest sign of affection feels vital. But when it's full, when there's inner abundance, everything changes. You don't connect out of lack, but out of resonance. You don't hold on out of fear, but out of desire. And that completely transforms the quality of the bond. The story of the fish isn't just about them. It's about us. About how we often force relationships in times of inner scarcity. And about how everything shifts when we finally find a full lake within ourselves. For much of human history, relying on others wasn't a flaw. It was the only way. There was no way to plant, harvest, hunt, heal, build, or survive alone. Life was woven together. The bread you ate passed through many hands, and the roof over your head was raised by the effort of neighbors, friends, and relatives. Human warmth wasn't an emotional luxury. It was a basic condition of existence. Communities were solid, not because everyone loved each other, but because everyone needed one another. Bonds were forged in the fire of necessity. Every gesture, every exchange, every hug, no matter how spontaneous it seemed, came from a context where being alone meant danger. Help was instinctive. Care was inevitable. There was something comforting in all of this, but also a limitation. No one had much choice. The absence of others wasn't really an option. As the centuries passed, everything began to change. Technology, urbanization, and individualism, little by little, we gained the means to live on our own. Zygmunt Bauman called this the shift from a solid community to a liquid one. Before, bonds were strong because they sustained life. Now, they've become flexible, fragile, disposable. Relationships stopped being anchors and started floating. But there's something in this transition that creates a strange emptiness. Because even though we can live without depending on anyone, we still carry an emotional memory of a time when being human meant being part of something. And sometimes, that nostalgia surfaces in a confusing way, a longing for connection that we no longer know how to live. We want deep bonds, but fear being trapped. We crave company, but love our freedom. And it's right in this paradox that the central question arises. How do we find balance between not needing and still choosing to be with someone? When dependence is no longer mandatory, love needs new foundations, and solitude, new meanings. Today, it's possible to go years without looking anyone in the eye. You wake up, order coffee through an app, work from home, watch the news on your phone, do therapy with AI, and receive deliveries at your door without saying a single word. Everything seems to work, and even better, it works alone. Technology hasn't just replaced physical presence, it's given us a new sensation, that we don't need anyone. Some may see this comfort as coldness, but for many, it's a relief. After all, how much pain is born from contact? How many demands, misunderstandings, expectations, and disappointments come along with the presence of another person? Living alone today has become a viable, sometimes even preferable option. But there's a subtle trap in this modern freedom. The feeling of self-sufficiency can turn into a bubble. The world shrinks to the size of our screen. Contact with others becomes optional, regulated by buttons, silenced by headphones, replaced by algorithms. And life slowly becomes a spectacle, as Guy Debord warned, where everything is seen, but almost nothing is touched. Still, it wouldn't be fair to see this shift as entirely negative. Because in some ways, the digital world gave us back a choice we didn't have for a long time. To be with someone because we want to, not because we need to. The fish is back in the full lake. It can swim alone, it can drift away, it can even return if it wants. But now there's space, there's room, there's freedom. The real question isn't whether living alone is better, but whether you're whole enough not to lose yourself in someone else's absence. Technology didn't make us self-sufficient, but it did force us to face a new responsibility, to build relationships out of desire, not out of need. And maybe that's one of the greatest achievements of our era. But if technology gives us choice, if the world offers us ways to live in silence, there's still one more question we can't avoid. What does it really mean to be alone? Because between the loneliness that eats away and the solitude that heals, there's an abyss. And crossing it takes more than external independence. It takes inner depth. Being alone hasn't always been desirable. For centuries, solitude was a sign of exclusion, punishment, helplessness. But when we no longer need others to meet our basic needs, solitude starts to take on a new face. It becomes a place of rest, a shelter where we can finally hear ourselves. It's no longer about enduring absence. It's about finding presence within absence. Carl Jung understood this. To him, there was a kind of withdrawal essential to the growth of the soul, a phase where the noise of the world had to be set aside so the inner truth could emerge. This isn't an escape, but a passage. Solitude, in this sense, is a conscious choice to be whole with yourself. Solitude is for me a source of healing that makes my life worth living. It's in this silence that we begin to notice just how much of our lives have been shaped by the fear of being alone. How many compromises have we made just to keep someone close? How many gestures were forced? How many yeses disguised a no? How many versions of ourselves were created just so we wouldn't disappoint? When we break free from need, all of that begins to dissolve. Little by little, we discover the joy of swimming alone. Because there's something sacred in being able to choose, in deciding when to come close and when to retreat. In this new world, solitude becomes the chance to become the full lake within ourselves, vast, deep, and whole. And as that inner vastness starts to grow, something inevitably shifts. Our tolerance for what wounds us begins to fade. We no longer need to endure empty conversations, worn-out ties, silences filled with tension. There's no longer a reason to carry the weight of relationships that drag us down. The freedom born from solitude also allows us to see what is excessive and let go. Because human interaction, as necessary as it once was, comes with a cost we don't always realize. There are looks that judge, words that control, tiny gestures that shape who we are without us even noticing. When we depend on someone, we start accepting what we don't want, silencing what should be spoken, holding on to what no longer makes sense. And all of it out of fear of being alone. Sartre expressed this with brutal honesty when he said, "Hell is other people. Not because others are inherently bad, but because their presence brings with it expectations, judgments, invisible demands. The gaze of the other is a mirror that often distorts. When we live trapped by that reflection, we stop existing within to survive on the outside. But when that need disappears, something new emerges. The ability to say no without guilt, to walk away without drama, to exist without shaping ourselves to fit into someone else's mold. Relationships stop being a burden and become a choice. And in that process, we learn that true respect is born only when we have the courage to refuse what hurts us, even if that means walking alone for a while. It's in this space of authenticity that our relationships begin to change. There's no longer fear of losing someone, because we are no longer lost. The other stops being a need and becomes a companion. And when that happens, every connection gains a new quality. The lightness of someone who stays because they want to, not because they have to. And yet, even when we manage to say no to what hurts, one trap still lingers: the desire to please. Because deep down, many still carry the weight of needing to be accepted, the need to belong somewhere, to be seen in a good light, to avoid disappointing others. It's a silent hunger, disguised as kindness, but born from a deep fear of not being enough. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this as one of humanity's greatest illusions. For him, we are constantly trying to mold ourselves to others' preferences, trying to build an image that pleases, even if it costs us the loss of who we really are. Other people's opinions become a distorted mirror in which we seek approval, even if it means hiding parts of ourselves to get it. This pursuit of acceptance drains our energy, time, and truth. We shape our words, our clothes, our ideas so we can be seen in a good light. But the price is high. We drift away from who we are. We betray ourselves little by little, just to maintain smiles that don't last. And by the time we realize it, we're living to please people who might not even be paying attention. Breaking that cycle is a quiet act of freedom. It doesn't mean being rude or indifferent. It means prioritizing what's real. Because those who live for appearances lose touch with essence. And happiness built on the expectations of others is never solid. All it takes is one criticism, one distance, one rejection, for it to collapse. When we stop needing external validation, something within us calms. We no longer have to prove anything or shrink ourselves to fit in. Taking care of our image is still important, but it no longer dictates our path. And in that space of truth, a different kind of joy is born. More subtle, more steady, more ours. A peace that doesn't depend on applause to stay alive. This silent peace, built far from the stages of approval, also transforms the way we love. When we stop seeking in others the confirmation that we are enough, we begin to relate differently. Love stops being a crutch, a savior, a shield against loneliness, and becomes an encounter, a real exchange, not a filling of emptiness. For a long time, love was about need. Marriages happened out of survival, economic security, social obligation. Love was a duty, not a choice. And even today, though the world has changed, many still live in relationships driven by fear. Fear of growing old alone, of not being desired, of having no one to share life's burdens with. But love born from fear never grows in peace. Bauman clearly observed this new landscape. Relationships that were once as solid as stone have become liquid. They slip through our fingers, dissolve at the first sign of conflict. And because of that, many live in unstable bonds, fueled by fragile promises and idealized expectations. But there is also a bright side to this transformation. The possibility of loving without dependence. When freedom enters, love changes. There are no more chains, no more suffocating obligations. Love is no longer a need, it's a want. And that choice, so simple and so rare, changes everything. It allows two people to meet without canceling themselves, without imprisoning each other, without needing to carry one another as a solution. In this new emotional space, real commitment only happens when there is real freedom. When we could walk away, but choose to stay. When the other's presence isn't a necessity, but a celebration. And in that moment, happiness isn't found in completing the other, but in being whole beside someone who is whole too. But even with all these possibilities for freedom, there's still something that paralyzes many hearts. The fear of being alone. As much as solitude brings peace, there are moments when emptiness creeps in like a shadow and makes us wonder if we're not missing something by choosing silence, by saying no, by not attaching ourselves to anyone. It's that fear that pushes so many people into empty relationships. Not out of love, but out of panic. Not out of desire, but out of absence. They enter into connections that suffocate, but temporarily ease the anguish of sleeping alone, of having no one to share a victory with, of not knowing who will come to the rescue when everything falls apart. But loving out of fear is like building a house on unstable ground. Sooner or later, everything shakes. Jung knew this. In his journal, after getting married, he wrote about the loss of something subtle and profound. Solitude. That inner freedom of being alone with himself, of hearing his soul without interference. Love transformed him, yes, but it also pulled him away from that sacred space. And this contradiction, so human, still haunts us today. To love is to make space for the other. But how much of ourselves do we lose in that opening? The risk of loving out of fear is giving up your own path. It's silencing your own voice just to keep someone close. It's accepting emotional crumbs just to avoid the echo of an empty room. But what seems empty is sometimes just a space waiting to be filled by yourself. And it's only when that inner presence grows stronger that love stops being a substitution and becomes an addition. It's no longer someone coming to save you, but someone walking beside you. Someone who doesn't take the place of your silence, but respects its existence. And in that lightness, love stops being urgent and becomes a mature choice. And when love becomes a choice, it no longer demands invisible sacrifices. It becomes light, honest, alive. Boundaries show up, yes, but not as defenses. They arise as acts of care for yourself. Only those who have learned not to lose themselves for anyone are capable of drawing those lines with firmness and peace. Saying no, in this context, is an act of wisdom, ending a cycle without bitterness, stepping away from ties that wound, choosing silence when others' noise empties you. And in that quiet, something new is born, the ability to choose with truth, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because it makes sense. Of course we need each other. No one lives entirely isolated. Someone grows the food you eat. Someone transports it. Someone cleans the streets, teaches, heals, builds. There's an invisible web that keeps us moving, sustaining everyday life with thousands of hands we may never see. But that's different from emotionally needing someone to feel whole. One thing is practical interdependence. Another is emotional dependence. That distinction changes everything, because when the other stops being your lifeline, they can finally become a companion, a connection that doesn't weigh you down, an affection that doesn't hold you back, a bond that respects your space. The less you need, the more you're able to love, not from lack, but from abundance. A love that doesn't demand fusion, that doesn't erase individuality, that walks side by side, breathing together, but without invading. And then, what was once urgency becomes calm. What was once attachment becomes presence. What was once desperation becomes clarity. It's the end of a waiting, the end of an eternal search for something only you could ever give yourself. And when that peace settles in, any love that comes afterward will be just that. Love. Not a remedy, not an escape, not an anchor, but a free presence, as light as it is real.